We are here today in beautiful Colorado, Boulder, Colorado at Cafe Blue, and so hence the music and the atmosphere.
The vibe.
The vibe that you hear. I'm very excited to have Larry Marine as a guest today. Larry is an expert in user research and user experience interaction design, or otherwise known as UX. I'm going to use that. Do you have a better way of
No, that's fine.
UX? Okay. He's been at the forefront of this burgeoning industry for over 20 years. Larry's goal is to help companies improve their bottom line by making it easier for users to complete tasks that are important to them. He has worked with a variety of large and small companies, including the U.S. Air Force Academy, FedEx, Kinko's, New Block, ProFlowers, and others. Is that a good list?
That's a start.
Start. Right.
We'll bring up more later.
That's right. Larry is an active UX evangelist and a president of Intuitive Design Group. He maintains a user experience blog with informative strategies and case studies to further your depth of UX understanding. So welcome, Larry.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice introduction.
All right, here we go.
You've done your homework.
Larry, could you define user experience and why product managers should know about it?
Well, every interaction that someone has with a product or a company or a service invokes an experience. You know, you go to a restaurant, you have an experience. You go use some service like a house cleaning service. There's an experience you have. You use a product like a piece of software. You have an experience with it. Every product has an experience, but it's up to the product manager to actually manage that experience. If you don't manage it, it's going to happen anyway, right? So do you want to have somebody have a specific experience? You can design for that experience. So, for instance, if a company, we have a client, medical device client, their user experience objective is to invoke a sense of trust in the use of their product. If the product allows errors to occur, then as people start making mistakes, that sense of trust is eroded by the number of errors that they make. And in a medical environment, you can't make a lot of errors and still have the product be successful, because at some point somebody's going to get hurt or die. So with this client, what we did was we looked at what goes on around the use of that medical device. And now we could have focused on just the interface for that device, but we looked at the entire aspect of it, the marketing, the branding, the positioning, the flow of the use, and we realized that there were a number of things that occurred around the product that we could affect. And so we came up with a piece of control software that also controlled all of the triggers, the inputs to this medical device, as well as the device itself and the outputs. Well, that created a whole experience around the use of that product, not just the product, but the use of it. And it was so successful that the client's competitor customers wanted that control software even though they were using the competitor product, because it gave a sense of trust in the process, not just the product.
So what are some of the pitfalls if we don't keep UX, user experience, in mind?
Well, one of the biggest problems is that a lot of product managers and developers and companies in general view user experience as kind of a warm fuzzy add-on that you know, if you have time and if you have money, you say, okay, let's give it to the UX folks and see if they can increase the warm fuzzy warmth of it.
Yes.
But usability and user experience really start as a strategic objective right up front. You have to know that you want to position your product a certain way. Now, let's look at Apple. Apple is a great opportunity of an example here. The iPod came into the market when the market was completely saturated by 100 other MP3 players. A lot of folks thought they were crazy, but they look at it from more of an experience perspective. They said, we want our customers to have this experience. Well, they looked at it from what's the initial messaging, what's the touch points, where does the user interact with this product, with this task? And so you look at what the other MP3 players were doing. There were 4 basic steps to use an MP3 player. First, you had to find the music, like with mp3.com. Then you had to manage the playlist using something like Music Match. And then you had to upload it onto your MP3 player using some quirky proprietary software. And then you finally got to play it on the device. Everybody thinks that the iPod was successful because it had really cool packaging. Well, it does, but that's not the only reason it succeeded. They looked at the other parts of the task, the whole flow. So what they were trying to do was eliminate the complexity of using an MP3 player. Because the people who were buying MP3 players back then were all tech savvy, you know, people that weren't afraid of technology, but the mainstream weren't buying it yet. Sales were starting to flatten out for MP3 players. So they went after the mainstream people who weren't buying MP3 players. And so what they did with iTunes, this is where iTunes came in and really made the iPod successful. Because iPod was originally launched without it, and then they added in iTunes. With iTunes, you could search the web and find your music, you could download it, you could manage the playlist, and it automatically uploaded into the iPod. So it eliminated 3 out of the 4 steps of using an MP3 player. But it did that in such a way that it created a whole culture around Apple products being so easy to use. So you look at the rest of Apple, you look at the iPhone, you know, there were smartphones all over the place. There was the Motorola Q, the Samsung, the BlackBerry, but those were, if they weren't being bought by somebody who was tech savvy, they were being forced onto somebody who wasn't tech savvy because the company wanted them, the IT department wanted them. So, you know, smartphones were starting to take off, but they weren't getting the traction that they thought they would. The iPhone came out, and then everybody had one. Mainstream people had one, which further embedded that notion that Apple products are simple to use. And it's not just the great packaging. I mean, Apple has a great marketing department. They know how to position it, they know how to message it, they know how to brand it. But all of that would fall flat on its face if, after all of that marketing, they had a product that just sucked. But it all fit together. It was a complete strategy. The user experience was designed from the very beginning, and the rest of the products, the iPad, the Mac, the iPhone, the iPod, were all designed to fit and support that user experience. So they started with the user experience strategy as opposed to adding it onto the end of the product.
Right. Good. So making sure that you bring the UX up front rather than as a tagline. So as a product manager.
Well, you know, it's just like any other marketing effort. You start with an objective, and everything you do tries to achieve that. User experience is just another objective.
Okay. All right. Good. What is the basic approach to focus on designing for that user experience?
That's really the complicated part, unfortunately. It's kind of a three-dimensional problem. The first part is you have to understand the problem you're trying to solve. So many products out there start off as an idea that was either, you know, somebody thought of as they're driving home, or it was a think tank brainstorming session, and somebody came up with a host of ideas and they started thinking about it. But unless you go out there and watch people, walk a mile in their moccasins, you really don't understand what their problems are. And good products fit the user's perception of their problem. Look at the iPod. It fit the user's perception that they weren't tech savvy, but they still wanted music. You know, the Walkman and the Discman were fading away into antiquity, but they wanted something digital. Well, all of the MP3 players out there were very techy.
Yeah.
So Apple walked a mile in their shoes, if you will, and came up with something that eliminated as much complexity as possible. So the first part is understand the user's problem from the user's perspective. And the next part is, once you understand the problem, design a solution that solves the problem. How many times have you seen products that, you know, it's just more features? There's not really a solution, it's just more stuff. And so much of what is out there in technology is, you know, they do some user research after the fact, but that's more of a justification of the solution as opposed to identifying what the problem is. So now that we have it identified in 2 steps, 1, identify the problem, 2, start to think about the solution. That process is actually broken up into 4 layers. The first layer is identify what objective you need to achieve. A user experience objective combined with a marketing objective, combined with a business objective. They all play well together. Next is, what strategy are you going to apply to achieve that objective? And by strategy from a product design perspective is, what best practices can you identify that you can incorporate into this so that your product does one thing and does it well? It's the old hedgehog principle in Jim Collins' Good to Great.
Right.
But so many products, let me give you an example of where strategy fails for a lot of products,
Okay.
where they don't consider strategy. If you have a tech product and they have 100 customers, they will go look at all of those customers and they'll say, all of these customers are doing it a different way. We have to have a product that is completely malleable. You can do anything you want, any way you want.
Yeah.
And so what you end up with is one size fits all screen that has all these buttons on it and nobody can figure out how to do anything.
Yeah.
So the user experience approach would be looking at it and saying, if we have 100 people doing it 100 different ways, that means nobody knows how to do it right. So the strategy you want to do there is identify what is the best practices approach that you can embody in the product design so that by default, people are doing it one way and really well.
Yeah.
Think of the iPod. Everybody, when it first came out, all the techies are going, this thing doesn't hardly do anything. I can do more with my old Sony and all this kind of stuff. But it did one thing really well, and look at, they own the market. Can you name any 3 of the other 100 that were in existence when they came out? No, they own the market because they did one thing well. So that's your strategy. The next level is the tactical level.
Yeah.
What design paradigms do you have in place that you know work, that you can apply to the strategy to implement the strategy? For instance, you may have a design paradigm that this is a wizard type product. It really works well if you have a wizard here. This part of it, a wizard is just a problem. So what you want to do is avoid a wizard there. So you have these tactical design paradigms you put in place to help implement the strategy that supports the objective. And then of course there's actual implementation, designing the graphical user interface. Most people start with the implementation layer, never really get to the tactical layer, and certainly don't even have a strategy. And the objective, make it warm and fuzzy. And that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Well, within the design process itself, now once you have those 4 layers, the rest of the company can go off and do their processes to support those 4 layers.
Okay.
In the user experience design, you have 5 other steps you have to do. First off is you have to have clear design objectives which support the user experience objectives, which marry up to the other objectives. And then you have to do some user research. And ethnographic research, observations are the best. Focus groups, surveys, interviews, they all suffer from self-reporting biases. So you don't want people telling you, like Henry Ford said, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses.
Yeah, sure.
But you have to look beyond what customers are saying they want and really analyze, what is it that they're doing. And then you do task analysis, and this is where you start looking at how can we take their tasks and optimize them to reach the strategic level. This is where you actually apply the strategy to the design at the task analysis. Because a good design is task-oriented, not feature-oriented, and certainly not data or detail-oriented. Once you have that task analysis done, then you start the actual design. But first and foremost, you have to remember, you're never going to get it right the first time. So you design it thinking there's something wrong here. And that brings you to the last step, and that is you evaluate it. You do usability testing. And usability testing isn't, hey, what do you think of this? It's like, okay, try to complete this task and watch and observe.
Good. Right.
So those are basically the 3 big chunks that you have to follow. Define the problem, then create the solution, and then the 4 steps: objectives, strategy, tactics, implementation, and then the 5 steps of design. Again, clarify your objectives, observe the users, optimize the tasks, design the UI to fit the task, and then test it to make sure. And of course, refine it because you know you're not going to get it right.